Welcome to episode 42 of Kontrarian Korner. I'm Ben Kelleran. Today we have a very special guest I've been looking forward to talking to for some time. He's got some interesting podcast episodes on RogueNews and follows a lot of stuff that's going on behind the scenes as far as geopolitics, markets, current events, and is a very sharp political commentator, and I think gives a perspective that a lot of people don't have a chance to see, but definitely worth checking out. But Veles, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Ben. I'm very glad to be here, and good morning, everybody.
Yeah, so I figured we could start with some of the recent stuff that's been going on over the weekend, whether it's people getting all fired up about the Epstein list not being released or Zelensky's blow up on Friday in the Oval Office. But the way I kind of filter all this stuff as far as like geopolitical current events is through the lens of how much of this is real, how much of it is political theater. Why am I seeing this and why am I seeing it now? And I usually try and wait a day or two to kind of form a full opinion on it, but it's there's just so many moving pieces, and I think the short-term news cycle seems like it has accelerated since Trump got into office. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on some of the recent goings on in basically Trump 2.0. So
right.
I'll let you take it from there.
Well, thank you. Well, and you kind of alluded to it there in your opening comments. One of the phrases or references we use on Rogue a lot is a line from the TV show Miami Vice that was on in the 1980s, where Sonny Crockett, the investigating police officer, tells somebody he's talking to, "This is Miami, and you don't know the players without a program." And that's kind of the approach we've used on Rogue and kind of our foundational basis, which is that most of the global world events you're viewing out there are not what you think they are. And no, I know a lot of people want to go with either the analogy that you got 12 guys sitting around a table making all the world's decisions or similar, but you have a lot of very powerful people out there who use proxies, and they use folks in front of them to take the fire, if you will, or even get killed, so that they could remain protected. And a perfect example of this is George Soros. Soros is a hood ornament. The person behind Soros, who's been running him for years, is a guy named Lord Malloch Brown. He's a member of the House of Lords in Britain, and who himself is connected to an organization called the London Corporation. So with the events over the weekend and to what you alluded to about Zelensky, nothing gets the public's attention faster than theater. Was such an exchange necessary? Well, I leave that to the critics and the pundits and the analysts. The Donald has certainly shown on a number of occasions, especially when you're dealing with even the press, that he'll go after the press who are not used to that, or some of them are stupid enough to actually think that they're gonna outbully him or outthink him. But in the case of Zelensky, we certainly have a fair amount of data now that indicates that he had been debriefed. And I don't like or at least for me personally, I don't go with the narrative about Democrat versus Republican, because both parties are completely compromised, and we are kind of living under a uniparty. But that said, at its core, and I know it's kind of challenging for folks to kind of mentally get their heads around this. Either that or they're so jaded it's like, oh, well, yeah, of course. Europe needs this Ukrainian conflict. Europe needs this war. And part of it is an age-old foreign policy, and I can't even really use foreign policy because it's not so much Britain as a country or as a government. Again, it's the London Corporation. London Corporation for hundreds of years has sought to take out anybody who is a potential threat to their power, and often through divide and conquer. And one of the major players in Europe outside of Germany that has represented that threat has been Russia, going all the way back to Imperial Russia to today. So the Ukraine conflict was used to try and wear Russia down or remove their authority and or their influence globally. And it has failed spectacularly, especially at the cost of millions of lives, most of them Ukrainian and or mercenaries. But the data on Ukraine is overwhelming, that the country was used for laundering of money, hiding of assets, and similar. Most of Ukraine's senior leaders, and this is through various fraud organizations or similar, have identified that they have holdings outside the country in a number of places, not the least of which is Israel. And Kolomoisky was often believed, Igor Kolomoisky, who was one of the people backing Zelensky, is not just a powerful oligarch. I mean, he is, for all intents and purposes, an asset of the Mossad and had been. And, you know, Zelensky was an entertainer. Now, I know folks could say the same thing about Trump, and that's, you can certainly debate that, or for that matter, Ronald Reagan. But the net of it is he's their figurehead. And, you know, the entertainment value of the T-shirts that he always wore and always being in fatigues and similar is straight out of Hollywood central casting. So now, and again, we always have to be cautious about anything in the mainstream media, or for that matter, 4chan or 8chan. But the net of it is that it appears as though Zelensky is trying to put back together again some sort of an agreement about the mineral assets in Ukraine to compensate the United States government for the immense amount of money. And we've certainly covered it down to the dime on our Rogue program a couple of times. You know, it's well in the hundreds of billions of dollars, which is a mind-numbing thought. And one of the things that I've raised several times on my programs has been, on most occasions, whenever there's a political debate in the U.S. government, you'll see the media and others all playing the two sides of the narrative, and a lot of emotion and a lot of flaring up and so on about that topic. And then it's dealt with one way or another. The United States voted at its initiation of the tranches of funding that were provided. One of the first votes was $100 billion, and there was practically no press coverage. And as I stated on a recent program of ours, whether it was the self-identified champions of the political left or the political right, neither of them said anything. And, you know, it's a bit Pollyannish, but I mean, for $100 billion, you could repair the U.S. FAA command and control systems quite easily. You could repair most of the interstates, the bridges that are at risk in the United States, or for that matter, just invest the money. You know, I'm sure even on a CD, you'll get a better return. But the amounts of money and material and resources that were sent to Ukraine is immense. Now, there's a narrative out there, which I agree with, which is that the vast majority of that money was actually laundered through Ukraine in order to prop up the European Union Central Bank, who was essentially defunct. And so that also goes to the heart of the weakening situation in Europe and similar, where those funds were necessary to keep them afloat. But now that the funds have been cut off and the war is winding down, I mean, the Ukrainians simply do not have the troops. And no matter how much Western weapon systems you provide them, and I worked as a research and development lead in the Department of Defense for a number of years, our weapon systems are incredibly complex, and it takes a very long time to learn how to use them properly, much less maintain them. And Ukraine doesn't have that kind of time. And most of the mercenaries fighting in Ukraine are on behalf of Ukraine at this point. No matter how much money you pay them, they don't want to be involved in it anymore. The Russians could roll into Kiev in a week if they wanted to. And Europe knows it. And so, final comment, this is why we're seeing so much commentary out of the White House and similar about both implied and stated, to the effect, it's ironic that you're threatening us with kicking us out of NATO, kicking the United States out of NATO, when there is no NATO without the United States. So where do you boys want to take this? So that kind of wraps up my thoughts on your first topic there.
Yeah, I think it is interesting to see what's going on in Europe, because as far as like financial side, there are people that talk about, oh, certain European stocks are cheap and like all these different things, European assets and whatnot. I just look at it as, look, I think people are missing the writing on the wall as far as what I think is coming for the European Union and probably NATO by the end of this decade, where like I just don't see the EU lasting until 2030 for a variety of reasons. And if you kind of game that out, you probably don't want to own European banks, no matter how cheap they are. You probably don't want to own European stocks and go down the list. But as far as the situation in Ukraine, it is interesting to see the reaction from certain figures in Europe, like political types, where they're talking about, oh, we're going to send troops to the front lines and we're going to basically do all we can to save Ukraine. And I just have a hard time seeing how that plays out, because you look at what they've done to their populations domestically. Who's going to sign up to go and fight for Ukraine, right?
Well, we also have the not to be indelicate, but we also have the small matter of the fact that for one of the first times in German history, many young people in Germany are not fit enough to serve in their military, which obviously we have the same problem here in the United States. Well, and I had this discussion with one of my colleagues on Rogue over the weekend while we were texting back and forth about a number of topics, which the net of that was, when someone says NATO or Europe at war with Russia, it begs the question, in what context do you mean that? I mean, not to be indelicate, are you boys going to just roll your military right past Warsaw and straight up to the Russian border? Are we talking cyber? Are we talking economic? Are we going to go with an old favorite in the Middle East, which is assassination? What do you boys have in mind as far as this war is concerned? On your commentary about Europe, without going back too far, the central theme in Europe, especially post World War II, was loosely said, who runs this joint? Is it France or is it Germany? And there was kind of a happy medium achieved in the 1950s, early 1960s, where France took on what they felt was the intellectual leadership of Europe, and Germany took on the industrial or financial leadership of Europe. And then, of course, for a number of reasons not worth getting on to in today's program, the French realized, as do many others, even at an individual level, that France, for lack of a better word, was surrounded. That the French leadership was smart enough to realize, my God, between the Lenin Corporation, the Soviet Union, and the United States, the French even made a comment in the 1960s or 70s at a military meeting. They left NATO, but they were still allowed to attend meetings and things. And it was in the public domain. The French made a comment where they said, we're totally prepared to launch nuclear missiles against targets in Europe as much as we are the Soviet Union. Because it's like, we know what this game is all about. We know what's really going on here. And for us to protect France, we just kind of need to act like the Swiss and go our own way. But there's a joke in Europe that not everyone believes in God, but everyone does believe in the Bundesbank. Mm-hmm. And of course, the German central bank is essentially the European central bank. Europe is just a bunch of scared children if they don't have the EU or something like it. And in fact, this is also another element behind the scenes for people, which is this aspect of Britain, both officially and unofficially as the Lenin Corporation. Because Britain in the beginning was, sure, we'd love to take a leading role in the EU. And then they kind of stepped back. And then it's like the hokey pokey. Then they're back in. Then it's the Brexit, we're removing ourselves from the EU. There's some folks out there a lot smarter than me on this topic who took the attitude that it was just one giant multi-decade setup by the British. Yeah, you guys go ahead and set up that European Union thing. We'll be right here. And then the minute it showed any weakness by design, they stepped away and the whole thing started to collapse. There's also a very excellent documentary called Master of the Universe, and it's German. It's got subtitles. But it's one of those things you just need to sit down with a cup of coffee and an afternoon when nobody's going to bother you and watch this thing. It was filmed in 2013. It came out in 2014, give or take. But it's essentially a documentary about a guy that was a major private equity leader in Germany. But towards the end, it really starts getting into some subtle stuff that I thought, boy, no wonder this is available in the United States, because nobody reads subtitles in the United States. And if you actually knew what was in here, they would protect it more than the truth about the Kennedy assassination, because he starts talking about they. And he's like, if they are going to destroy the EU, you have to take out Germany and then France. And he kind of laid out, and this is in 2014, he kind of laid out, with Germany, you'll go after the central bank, even though it's the EU central bank. And then in France, you'll go after...
And probably the industrial energy side of it, right?
Yeah, you'll weaken their access to cheaper power. And then the last straw is they're like, once Germany quote unquote falls, then they're going to come after France. And then around that time was when you started seeing churches burning down in France. You saw a lot of social problems. You saw the cheap labor from North Africa and from Syria resisting. And it's kind of interesting. There's a number of French philosophers and researchers who've said for years that the Francophile mind just cannot understand why no one doesn't want to be French or Parisian. Because it's like, look at the amazing history of our country and this, that, and the other. Why would you not want to be part of this? And it's like, but we're not French. You know, we're here because we need the work, but and we need the pay. But we don't. We like, you're as foreign to us as a UFO landing on the White House lawn. We don't understand you. We don't like you. You also have a pretty brutal colonial history that you don't want to talk about. But Europe in some form as a European Union, or for students of history, if you go way back to, the various trade agreements and stuff that started to get set up after World War II. But central to the whole thing, and even in publications like Foreign Affairs Magazine and Foreign Policy Magazine and others that I read when I was in grad school and are all the big policy people's publications, who of course in turn are published by the Council on Foreign Relations and other organizations who all owe their allegiance to the Lenin Corporation. Even those publications said that, that Europe is eventually going to reach a make or break moment, that to get those countries to agree and cough up that much sovereignty to oppose or be an equal to the United States is always going to be a major problem. And then the other thing is that for our RogueNews view, depending on how you look at it, we'll just use a loose number like 10, that you had 10 major factions who actually call the shots on a lot of things going on in this world, whether the Davos Consortium out of Switzerland, the Lenin Corporation, certain private equity groups, intelligence agencies, the list goes on. They, for lack of a better word, they wanted to kick the EU off the table. They wanted to make sure that when the new, when the new economic model post Bretton Woods came into being, whenever that was, that they weren't one of the people sitting at the table dictating how they thought things would be. And by the time Europe realized that, it was too late. Now, because God has a sense of humor, last summer, I was in Geneva and Bern, Switzerland. I was in Rome. I was in Barcelona. I was in a few other spots. Everywhere I went, and this is the old intelligence rule about always talk to taxi cab drivers and people at the front desk of hotels if you want to know what's going on, and bartenders. The equivalent of European Uber drivers or others. Everybody I spoke to, as soon as we kind of started to get a conversation going, once they knew I kind of monitor or even my podcast, suddenly an almost panicked conversation started with them asking me what's going on. And that's from Switzerland to Italy to Spain to other countries. And when I say what's going on, what I mean is these were fairly well-read people. They run their own businesses, which means they're trying to surf all these European taxes and everything. And they would always to a person tell me, we have no information in Europe on anything. It's like a movie. Our media does not tell us a thing. I mean, oh, sure, there's plenty of news. But and it was funny, many of them were like, as small business owners or as business owners or working for businesses, we know factually that, like, I was joking with a driver in Italy where I said, so you've literally gotten to the point, it's like the Soviet Union, where you know literally everything the Soviet news is telling you is a lie. We've had amazing harvests this year. Oh my God, we're going to starve. And it was the same thing in Europe, that they would say, well, do you watch or monitor your American media? And I said, no. As ironic as this sounds, I'm among many things, I said, I monitor yours. And the one guy like literally pulled the car over on a small road and looked in the back seat. And he looked at me and he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, it's the oldest joke there is. If you want to know what's going on in your own country, you never listen to your own news. And he kind of looked down at the floor and then nodded. And I said, if I want to know what's going on in the United States, I listen to the Japanese media. Because I said, who in the hell in the United States listens to Japanese media to understand what's going on in the United States? And he goes, okay, I get it. And I said, so, there's certain media sources in the United States. And in every case, I was like, here's our program, here's how to find us. But I'm like, here are some sources of information you may want to check. But it was, I wouldn't use the word panic, but it was a deep fear by many. And that it doesn't mean it's inclusive, but many of the people I met, just they can't get a straight answer on what's going on in their own countries, much less what was going on in Europe. And that's very telling. That's very telling.
Interesting. So you mentioned a make or break type moment. Are we at that moment for the EU, or are we approaching it, or what's your view there?
I think it's already passed.
Okay.
I think at this point, and I'm not very much a sports person. I do like European soccer and international rugby, but I'm not the typical American with football and basketball and baseball and things. I tried. I swear I tried. It just wasn't my thing. Or to quote Noam Chomsky, what did he used to say? That American media and sports are an opiate for the people. But I think where we are at this point is that, and again, this gets dangerously close to the 12 guys sitting around a big table analogy, but there's every appearance, especially the last 20 years, that there was an economic model being prepared and pushed to replace Bretton Woods. And a lot of it dealt with the dollar. And yes, I'll even go so far as to say that if you truly, truly dig into what happened, now this is going to sound a little strange for some of you, if you truly dig into what happened to the World Trade Center in 1993, you'll understand why they had to destroy it in 2001. Because it deals with the central banks and it deals with disruption. And there's powerful people out there that will crash an entire global economy if at the end of it they're still doing better than everybody else. And so most of the effort towards a new global economy was pushed and directed, more accurately, by the London Corporation. And again, very, very broad brushstrokes here and loose statements, but the Davos private equity consortium in Switzerland, along with, and the Swiss have always had some very fascinating and terrifying goals of their own as a landlocked country, but holding everybody's bank accounts. Davos was not a fan, and neither were some of the larger banks in the United States, some private equity groups in the United States. And candidly, yes, at its core of the new economic model that was being pushed for a post-Bretton Woods world, at its core was most countries would lose more sovereignty than they already had, and for lack of a better word, autonomy. And this is where the topic of nationalism comes up, because if there's anything globalists can't stand is nationalism, because it gives you an identity. And this is why when it comes, now I know some people might say, well, wait a minute, Veles, because I can poke holes in the next thing you're about to say. This is why when it comes to certain religions, they violently try to weaken certain types of religions, because they don't want you having anything that allows you to organize. I think on a certain level, and as a former gamer myself, I think if they could find a way to break up online gaming, they would do it, just simply because what socially has happened with online gaming. Well, it's created, I'm talking from the 1990s to now, it's created communities of people who self-identify and self-organize. And again, there's nothing the globalists can't stand more than self-organizing, self-identified individuals with their own ideas that are different than theirs. So call it gravity, call it the immensity of what they were trying to pull off, etc. And just from a functional level, it wasn't working. And so, in my opinion, and drawing from my own thoughts as well as a number of other researchers on this topic, I think what happened is there was an understanding globally that, look, London, what you're trying to do isn't working. And we know you're all in the poker game, so you just keep funding and pushing this thing. But we're going to have to stop you. And this was manifested in everything from international leaders who found themselves dead, to major corporate scandals, to a whole host of other things. And now that the smoke is cleared, what we've got now is you could make the argument that the United States had financial autonomy of a fashion the last, let's say, 60 years. Political autonomy is a lot more questionable. There really wasn't political autonomy. When I say political autonomy, I don't mean Democrats and Republicans. I mean that the United States on the international stage could unilaterally just say, this is our decision, this is what we want to do. And again, I don't mean that people wouldn't oppose us. What I'm saying is that our foreign policy decisions, our economic decisions, were heavily influenced by others. And there was a degree to which the United States could not make its own decisions at a political level. We could financially, but we couldn't at a political level. And without, I know there are some fans of Donald Trump who would say, well, thanks to Donald being elected. And it's like, if you think Donald Trump was elected by the populace, I'm not saying he wasn't. I'm not saying everybody voted for Kamala Harris. I'm just saying, if you think American elections since 1963 are fair, we need to have a cup of coffee and have a long conversation, because I'm going to tell you a whole bunch of stuff you don't want to hear. But his ascendancy to the presidency again, to me and others, symbolizes that, like I said, a hood ornament. There are many people behind him. And these, I loosely use the joke on my show, before they even walked into 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, he and his staff just had these big binders. And it's like, okay, you go over here and do your binder. You go over here and do your binder. And everybody's just flipping through tabs and pages, executing stuff that was mapped out months ago. And to your question, and to something I'm going to cover on my own show later this week, I'll say it here first, is, and again, loosely said, in order to restart the engine that is the global economy, drastic measures are necessary. And so London's power, and this is where people like Tom Luongo often talk about multiplayer games and why you can't view the world as two powers, because a two-person game usually only ends one way. But when you got 5, 6, 7 major players, now you're in Frank Herbert's Dune series. You can't ever really take somebody out, because if you do, you're going to disrupt the whole damn game. They can be weakened, they can lose, but they're never not a player. And that's kind of what's happened with London. London has had to step back. Other people have assumed leadership of the London Corporation at this point. And they're trying to find a middle ground and sustain themselves. And Davos, in my opinion, is exhausted from having to fight the London Corporation because they're not as influential and powerful. But in the final analysis, the world is taking out some very large jumper cables right now, trying to get the engine started on a different model. And the different model is not necessarily going to be one big global autonomous government and economy run by a handful of people out of Europe anymore. It's going to be more of a multipolar world. And that opens both opportunities and risks because of countries pursuing their own self-interest. But in the case of the United States, the other thing is that without getting into the granularity of how it happened, the United States at this point has achieved international political autonomy as well as economic, and that's huge. That's immense, because we haven't really had economic autonomy since after the war between the states. We haven't had political autonomy in some time. Now, does it mean the United States is leading? Well, not exactly. It means the U.S. economy is leading, and so this is why we're living in a world where AKA Donald Trump, the United States, is saying, essentially, hey, Greenland and Canada, we're buying you. It's like, holy shit. If that happened under Bill Clinton or even George Bush, my God, the media wouldn't stop talking about it. Now the media is just kind of like, and now the weather. We are having global leaders having to come to the United States and drop a knee, whether it's Keir Starmer, whether it's the French foreign leader, whether it's Zelensky, whether it's others, whether it's Canada's prime minister. Everyone is coming to Washington to drop a knee and basically say, okay, we're going along with this new plan. No, we're not traveling to these countries and saying, hey, everybody, let's have a meeting. Let's talk about it. That's not happening. What's happening is everybody's coming here and dropping a knee. Now, for people who still believe the political system actually functions, I'm sure that's incredibly terrifying, because it's like, damn it, how the hell did this guy pull this off? If you think one guy pulled that off, again, you need some medication. That's not how the world works. But yeah, Europe will continue, but in a greatly weakened state. London Corporation is weakened, but still dangerous as all get out. And the other takeaway too is, even in this new economic model, it does not mean that we should not be mindful that there are still people in those ranks who have a deep-seated desire to see us all with chips in our heads and as nothing but consumers to what they desire. I mean, that's still a reality. You know, one of the things we often talk about on our programs is it's tragic, it's unfortunate, but you can't ever view the international environment in terms of good and bad, because there's always going to be good and bad happening, and that just is. These people are self-interested actors. They'll wipe out entire countries if they think it's necessary. I mean, they operate and think. There's no other way to say it. They operate and think like gods of the ancient world because that's what they, on a certain level, believe they are. But that's a whole other topic.
Yeah. No, it is interesting because I think this is becoming more apparent to a lot of people too, especially after some of the stuff that's happened in 2020, where people start to wake up to thoughts and ideas that I think before they wouldn't have even considered. But to kind of go to your point on the realignment of the kind of nationalist versus globalist mindset, realignment of the financial system, and the competing factions that you see, whether it's parts of Europe or groups here in the US, I think it is interesting to see like the gold flowing out of the LBMA into the US and some of the other things going on there, where I can't remember what the exact amount was, but it's just a massive amount of gold has flowed into the US over the last 3 months.
It has.
It's interesting because that's one of their main sources of power with, was it like a third of financial transactions make their way through the city of London, something like that?
They did, and they have, yes.
Yeah.
And if I can pick up from where you're going with that,
Yeah.
there's a very, very, very savant-ish kind of guy named Patrick Ryan. And I bless the ground he works on, because he's one of these people that, I mean this quite literally, his brain works on a level that's just different than the rest of us. I mean, he is truly a functioning savant. And he's one of those people that when I worked at the defense world, and especially in the think tank world that works for the government, he's one of these people that could literally look at hundreds of hours of work by really qualified, smart people, and all sorts of maps and graphics and grids on tables and things and up on the walls, and just sit there and rub his chin for a few moments and then look at everybody after about 10 minutes and go, the answer's 4. You know, and everybody be like, well, no, it has to be 7 because we've worked so hard at it. And it's like, no, it's 4. Here's why. And at the end of it, you're just sitting there going, this is one guy. How the hell did he do this? Patrick Ryan is an incredibly interesting guy. And for any of you out there looking for him, you're not going to find him. Now, is he in the public domain? Yes. Can you find some of his videos on YouTube? Yes. He literally, I swear to God, slips in and out of society when it suits him, and the rest of the time he's just sitting with the Oracle of Delphi, pondering the meaning of the universe. Patrick is one of the few people I've ever seen who brought up the following, and this is a factual historical event, and it goes exactly to what you're talking about. When World War II was coming, and depending on who you talk to, because they were starting it, or they just kind of knew, certain powerful people were like, oh God, they're going to start another European war again. Okay. Many countries in Europe moved large quantities, not all of it, but they moved large quantities of their gold reserves, the physical gold, out of Europe. Even Spain, who had just gone through the Civil War and was kind of like fascist, but we don't want to get involved with Hitler kind of thing. Many powers in Europe, from Britain to France to Belgium to Luxembourg, even countries we were going to be at war with like Italy, they moved their gold to the United States. Now, it's a very practical move, and it's almost like the era of castles, just in case we get overrun and they try and steal our gold. So the United States is sitting on all these on a lot of bullion, and what do you call it? One of the places that was kept, yes, was Fort Knox. When the war was over and the smoke cleared and Bretton Woods was, okay, everybody, here's the new economic model. We and the British just came out of a room filled with cigarette smoke. This is what's going on. We're going to call it Bretton Woods, and we're going to base pretty much most of the world activity on the dollar, and the dollar's backed by gold. Okay, sounds great. Can we have our gold back? No. What? No. But it's ours. Yeah, but we're not giving it back.
Possession is 9/10
9/10
of
the
the
law. Well, but wait. So France, who was still, I mean, no harm, no foul towards the French people, but France, whose ego was still greatly bruised over getting overrun by the Germans a second time. And then there was that small little matter nobody wants to talk about, which was when the United States moved into North Africa to face off against German forces there. And by the way, why were the Germans even in North Africa to bail out Italy? No, they were there for oil. But when we landed, the torchlight landings in North Africa, we landed in areas that were controlled by the Vichy French, who were aligned with Germany. And they opened fire on us. And we returned fire, and we killed everyone. And several French warships engaged the newly upgraded U.S. warships, who had very early computers to factor, the mathematics behind making sure the ordnance lands where it's supposed to go. The French literally got off one or two shots, and we just decimated their vessels before they even got out of port. And that didn't go over well, because it's like, God, the Germans are beating up on us. The Americans are killing us. I mean, Jesus. So now the French government is picking up the pieces around the country and getting all the burned out tanks off the roads. And they're like, hey, America, we're not kidding. We want our money back. And the United States informed a lot of people, look, your money is safe in our banks, and we'll pay you back in dollars. We don't want dollars. We want look. We all of us know, we don't tell our publics this, but paper money isn't crap. We want our bullion back. We want our gold. We want our platinum back. And the United States said no. So the French sent like 2 to 4 warships. This is historically true. They sent a couple of warships to the United States, and we met them in the middle of the Atlantic. And it was basically, in the words of Patrick Ryan, oh, that's cute. You think you have a navy. And the United States basically informed the French, A, we knew before you left port what your plans were. B, we're smart enough and have good enough intelligence and systems in the 40s that we knew where your ships were before they even reached the United States. Next item, no one will ever know that we had this little discussion because that would look bad. And last item, go home. Go home, because this isn't going to, no. You're not sailing into New York Harbor and telling us you're taking your gold back. I mean, this is very French of you, but no, go home. And so the French turned around and went home.
When was that?
This was in the 1940s, about 2 to 3 years after World War II ended.
Okay, so 25 years later, they did end up getting some of the gold back, though, when they
got it back in the form of dollars. We're depending on who you talk to, we've still got it. In fact, if you really want to know an incredibly weird one, the United States is supposedly still holding on to 1/4 to 1/3 of Imperial Russia's gold, because the gold was placed in the United States on the orders of the Tsar, and because the royal family was murdered, there's no Romanov a member of the Romanov family with enough authority to tell New York's banks, give us our gold back. So, there's a certain joke in certain circles that sitting in the bowels of certain banks in New York are gold bars with the Imperial double eagle on them. And, they use them as collateral. They're a bank, but somebody once did a calculation on how much that money's worth now. It's impressive, and you can understand why nobody wants to get like. I have no doubt that the current Russian government a couple times is like, hey, we just thought we'd ask, can we have the Tsar's gold back? Hell no. Okay, we're not going to sail any ships over. We're just saying we were wondering. So to your point about the current state today, as crazy as this sounds, and Tom Luongo and others are some of the folks talking about it, a number of countries, this time also including Asia and South America, have been putting gold into the United States. And a lot of countries have been very hurriedly trying to put more bullion into their reserves, including China. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with this. I know Algo is, and V is. This is where we get into the realm of salted gold. gold that is not actually pure gold. It's got other metals mixed into it. The Chinese, which I'm stunned by this, there must have been a reason why they did it, but about 5 to 8 years ago, the government of China acknowledged that they found that a fair amount of the gold they had was salted. And so they went on a long, careful campaign of using acid tests and similar to find out how much of their gold was compromised, possibly even melting some of it down to get the impurities out, and then finding out how much of it was actual gold versus other metals. Then, in the realm of the international environment, tapping some people on the shoulder and saying, "Hey, you sold us salted gold. We're not above having you killed." I mean, it's like, we're going to talk about this. But that, by the way, was a huge, as they say in Japan, a huge sucking air across your teeth moment of oh my God, for a lot of governments around the world, because quietly behind the scenes, and I've heard this from people in the banking world, and for that matter, the metallurgy world, there were all these kind of quiet conversations being placed by attorneys who wouldn't admit who they were working for to various smelters to say, we need some metals tested. And it's like, well, I'm pretty sure I know where this is going, because bullion reserves around the world, people were realizing, oh my God, our gold is maybe only 50% gold or 60% gold. And that's a problem. So in the end, and one of the, by the way, Ben, you may or may not be aware of the following. I've had quite a few people in our audience say, I really like your shipwreck stories, Veles. For any of you who have an interest, go dig into major shipwrecks from like the period of Spain in the Americas and so on. Governments have darn near gone to war over pulling that stuff off the bottom of the ocean. Colombia, in fact, has the San Jose, I think it was, that went down. A major Spanish galleon, a British squadron caught her before she got into the open sea with some escort ships, and the British commander was trying to capture the vessel, but as the old saying goes, there was a lucky shot, and they hit the vessel, and it hit a store of munitions, and the boat went down. The ship has, I forget, and I'm not going to say this correctly, it's like $10 to $20 billion of emeralds, gold, and silver aboard. And the Colombian government knows exactly where the ship is, but the Colombian government's been having to keep warships near it to keep anybody from poking around down there, because they don't want the money stolen. Now, the courts internationally have been active on this one for years, as well as several other vessels where the SS Americas that we pulled up that was trying to get through the Panama Canal and others. You can buy the coins now online, but that's real money. That's not paper money. That's real money. And when you're a government like Colombia and you got 10 to 20 billion of metallurgical money that is it's yours in the sense that you can take it. That's no joke. Countries will go to war over that. I mean, that could improve Colombia's standing against Argentina and Brazil as far as who's calling the shots down in South America. And of course, what happened? Well, Spain said that the money is theirs, or at least part of it. Britain says we captured it in a war, but the ship sank before we could get it off. It's ours. This happens every time. And the thing I've often told our audience is this may look comedic. This may look like it's a joke. But when you're dealing with even countries like Spain found, I forgot who it was. It was a vessel containing payroll, I think, but it was during the era when they paid sailors in silver and similar. They're arguing in the courts, but behind the scenes, it's like, man, I'm going to seize your embassy. Like, stop screwing with us over the whatever that we just found off our coast, because it's and also beyond the historical and numismatic value of having, say, Spanish coins from that era or what have you, which kind of adds to its value. But these governments are deadly serious about these shipwrecks because it's real money. So if that's what's happening when it comes to people reclaiming lost vessels and their cargoes of precious metals, what do you think they're going to do when they're moving bullion into the United States? And this is a very gross generalization of a statement, but governments around the world are putting gold into the United States for several reasons. One, it improves the negotiating position of the United States vis-a-vis the London Corporation. The second is it enables the United States to have more real currency value by having metals at our disposal than just paper. And then last but not least, it's in this new economic model, and we'll have to see what it looks like after the ink dries. But the dollar, whether it's a digital dollar or it's a physical dollar, the dollar will be strengthened. Now, some of you might be saying, well, wait, are we going to a metals-backed security again? I don't know how that could ever happen. I've seen economists for years. I've sat in the classroom of economists saying, well, it could be done. We would use a basket of materials, not just gold, because there's not enough gold in the world to back up the dollar. There just isn't. But we could
not at current gold prices, that's for sure.
Right, exactly. And of course, what would happen to the global economy if we did price it correctly? But no, I've heard everything from what do you call it, zinc to copper to so on, and it's like, you know, the accepted basket of conversion is so many pounds or ounces of these different metals to the dollar. And it's like, okay, there. You could do that. But no one in their right mind at the central bank level wants to do that, because the whole point of getting off of a metals-backed money was it allowed the money to inflate. And it allowed, I'll use the economics term, it allowed permutations in the economy that were not possible if you had a currency that's backed on a precious substance of some kind, call it gold, call it what you will. And when most of the world denominated things in dollars, they were kind of part of the same sleight of hand, which is, well, you may not like the French franc, but, you know, there's so many francs to the dollar. Well, okay. Then, of course, all of Europe united into one single currency, the euro, and, you know, it's got problems of its own. But where I'm going with this is, in order to get this new economic model launched, the United States has to be strong enough, at least for a period of time financially, to be able to say, okay, look, and this is not anything they'd ever tell the voting public anywhere in the world, but behind the scenes, people who are in charge, and I use that term loosely, they're come to an understanding that it's like, look, the United States is holding most of the bullion. And if your country's got, let's say, a third of your bullion in the U.S., well, it's the same kind of arrangement the French had but didn't want, which is, we'll back your native currency because you've got your gold with us. Because if your gold was in your vaults in your country, well, it's way the hell down there. But it's in the U.S., and so we'll account for it. I think one of the things I always found very fascinating was, for some of you students of history, the old World Trade Centers before 9/11. In the basement of one of them were a series of vaults, and there were closed circuit TVs in there and so on. And what they would do is if France was going to back Germany, like Germany needs an infusion of capital, they had areas on the floor that were identified both, you know, it would be in English, Spain, and then below it, España, in your native language. And if they needed to back somebody's currency, they would have either workers come or a forklift come or what have you. And they would literally live show that we're moving this pallet of metal out of your country's holding area and over to the other country's holding area. And then it's like, okay, well, they're backing this financial move of a currency infusion. Okay, we're all good. We're all good. And then, of course, the problem is that when the 9/11 attacks occurred, that wasn't working, which is why if you research carefully, and it is in the public domain, within a day or two of the buildings falling, there was a point at which, I don't like using the word special forces, but basically highly trained U.S. military with the Army Corps of Engineers rolled in and basically told the media, hey, you're not stupid, turn off the lights. You're not filming anything for the next, 12 hours or what have you. The rescue people and the everybody from bomb disposal to others were all kind of moved out of there. They went off and got some sleep or whatever. And the Army Corps of Engineers went in there and they just burrowed deep into where that vault area was. And they had a bunch of people with cameras and everything else, and they filmed everything live to governments around the world to say, okay, the vault was structurally intact. And all your stuff outside of some dust and maybe some stuff in the ceiling that fell down all of your metals are safely here. And all of that was carefully removed and taken out of there. Now, where it was taken is anybody's guess. I mean, hell, it could be Bank of America, down in North Carolina. But those metals were safely removed out of there.
Yeah, interesting.
Because they had to. And so that's kind of where we are right now is the ink's not dry. It's kind of hard. I know people at Tom Longo probably have a better read on it than I do. But the net of it is the United States is acting like a bully right now because we have to. And I know that may sound strange, but in order to get this new economic model up and running, the United States both has to be allowed and is going to be allowed to do really wacky crap. To
basically force everyone to get in line.
Yes, that it's like this is the model we're going with, folks, and this is what we're going to do. And it's I may be going a little too over my skis here, but I mean it's. Somebody once asked me on our Discord channel, Veles, do you think that like this whole thing about Greenland is collateral? And I said, that's absolutely unequivocally it. You're spot on. Yeah. Greenland is capital. And they're like, oh my God. And I'm like, well, yeah, but I said, it's like the old joke about what do you do when a society is incredibly distressed? Nobody really cares about gold anymore. They care a whole hell of a lot about clean water and food. So it's like the same thing here. Look, you may have been on board with the London Corporation. You may have thought their idea of moving the world forward was what you wanted to do. You may have felt that running your own country was just too much work and we'll just let the British do it. That is not going to happen.
Yeah. Here's
been
a change of plans.
Right. So in order to get this thing off the ground, the United States has to do what we're doing now. The truth of that statement also, though, is because we are not gods over here, is the United States is in immense trouble. We have $1 trillion each of college loans that are believed to never going to be repaid. We have $1 trillion of credit card debt that is believed to never going to be repaid. We have $1 trillion of, I believe, car loans. And then my personal favorite, the one that, like, you can talk about the three things I just said and everybody's fine. But when I mention this fourth thing, people start showing up at your door being like, okay, very funny. Get off the air and stop talking about that. Commercial real estate. We have $1 trillion of commercial real estate in the United States right now that is essentially bankrupt. And to get that off the books, because any economist or accountant will tell you, well, you can take it off the books. I mean, it could be done, but oh my God, you can't just say, oh, well, we're not getting that money back. It's like, whoa, hang on there, Chief. That money pays for other things.
Someone's going to get blown up at some point,
yes.
I think.
And so where I'm going with this is that's just what's going on in the private sector part of our country. Then as a former defense contractor, being me, and as somebody who dealt with hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on things and the incompetence, I don't like the blanket statement of just, well, every federal agency is a bunch of morons. That's not true. There's some truth to it, but that's not entirely true. But we are ripping massive amounts of money out of the federal budget right now. And love, hate, confused by Elon Musk, it doesn't matter, folks. It's again, he's another hood ornament. I mean, this thing about, well, Donald Trump doesn't really like him. Well, Donald Trump shouldn't trust him. Well, Elon Musk is batshit crazy. Well, Elon Musk needs to stop marrying women who practice witchcraft. All of that is true. But the man has a job. If you know anything at all about Elon Musk's background, and by the way, his father was the head of a major eugenicist organization, a transhumanist organization in South Africa, and that is certainly important to be aware of. But Elon Musk has been doing a mountain of classified research work for the government for years. He's also been warned, and this is in the public domain, he's been warned on a number of occasions to watch it with the Adderall and the other stuff he takes to keep his brain operating at the level that he does, because he makes statements in private dinner parties he shouldn't be making about propulsion systems and similar he's working on for the U.S. government. So where I'm going with this is he's been a tool since day one. I don't even think he knows who he worked for. But in the final analysis, they needed somebody crazy enough. It's like the movie Patton. You need a screwball old cavalryman to engage the Germans across the center of France. You needed somebody crazy enough and with enough ego to go run a non-governmental department called Doge and just start showing up. And I use this analogy on our show, like a bad rendition of Monty Python's flying circus with the Beware the Spanish Inquisition, where his folks just show up suddenly and go, "We want all your records." Now, are they finding absolute stupidity? Yes. Are they finding fraud? Yes. Are they finding projects that make absolutely no sense? Yes. Do I personally know of many, many people I used to work with that are still in the federal contracting world, either as civilians or as feds, who are now being told, we've got yet another 12-page document you got to fill out that explains what the hell are you guys doing around here? What are you working on? What actually is the value of that, etc.? Prove to us. Now, I've told some people I work with in the academic world right now that are in their universe very mad about their grant money being frozen. I've got one university in particular that gets about $70 to $80 million a year just from the National Institutes of Health alone. And after the academics stopped screaming and spilling their coffee all over the place, I looked at them and said, just fill out the damn forms. Just explain to the government, well, this research is vital. No. That's what you say to the parents that you want to have their kids attend this university. You want your money? Well, yeah. How many more months do you have until the money runs out? Well, we're not quite sure. I'm sorry, what? Well, we're so used to getting the money, we don't even really manage how much of it we're spending. Okay, well, you see, there's the problem. Yeah. That's a perfect example why that crazy guy is out there with his Spanish Inquisition guys in their red robes running around asking questions. And so it's like, if I were you, look, I even told one PhD this. I said, look, I don't want to see you guys fail, because then you become a problem I got to deal with. So look, it's just listen to me. What? Go grab yourself a couple of political science majors, both at the undergraduate and graduate level, and then go get some MBA students and go get some business majors, the good ones, not the ones who are here because their parents have money, and have them develop for you a marketing statement about the work you're doing. Well, we are highly qualified PhDs. Yes, and after the second or third PhD, we have to remove the personality out of you because there's not enough room in the human brain for all of that. So go get these people. What do we need the poli-sci majors for? Because they understand government. Oh, I see where you're going with this. Right. Well, how will we compensate them? Write them a very nice letter so that when they graduate, they can see that they've provided cross-functional support academically. Oh, you've done this before. You bet I have. Okay, now back to school. So, yeah, we've got to get a lot of money out of the U.S. budget, and they're doing it, and it's painful, and people are screaming, and people are like, my God, because I've worked with federal people. For somebody to get fired in government, it does happen, but it is such an act of God. And by the way, little known fact, another one of these, people won't tell you this. If you're a secretary or a deputy secretary of a federal agency, if you're a senior ranking what they call the SES level, the senior executive service, this is different than a GS, general services pay grade. Many of you out there may have heard, GS8, GS12, what have you. There's also the SES folks. If you're an SES level person, which is like the equivalent of a flag officer in the military, and you get fired, like what happened at FEMA back in 2005, you are persona non grata to any federal agency for life. That's a fact. And so, the joke that's used in Washington is it's spiritual death. And so if you got fired and no government agency wants to hire you, and let's be honest, a lot of people work for the government because they don't think they're good enough to work for the commercial sector. What are the odds the commercial sector is going to hire you? The guy who used to run FEMA, the only job he could find was going back to, of all places, Louisiana, who has parishes instead of counties. And he became the emergency manager for a parish in Louisiana at about $35,000 a year, because that was the only job he could get. And perhaps, I don't know, even the people of Louisiana felt he got shafted in spite of the fact that FEMA just had so many problems in trying to respond to that disaster. Now imagine the analogy of what I just told you spread across the entire government. And this is why you're seeing so much home sales. What were the latest statistics that 60% of people trying to sell homes in Virginia, Maryland, Washington, D.C. itself, and even a little sliver there of West Virginia, all of the people who work in the quote-unquote Beltway, 60% of the homes that are for sale are all marked as urgent and willing to take a loss. I mean, I never thought, there's a lot of things we often joke about on Rogue about, I never thought I'd live long enough to see fill in the blank. In fact, one of our colleagues, Gus Demos, does that a lot. That he'll be making a point, and he'll say, "Folks, you've lived long enough in your lives that you've been able to actually witness with your own eyes, whatever it may be, the fall of the Soviet Union." And so, with these home sales, I mean, I lived for a while in Tyson's Corner. I lived in Pentagon City for a while. Those areas are expensive enough they can give California a run for their money. And to see this kind of an exodus. Because the simple fact is, who owns these nice homes? Well, it's the heads of commercial consulting firms. It's the heads of agencies. They're the only people who could have enough money to afford those types of homes. And they're all for sale. I mean, that is huge. This isn't rank and file. This is the leadership are bailing.
So the writing's on the wall is what you're saying. For
the writing's on the wall. And the other thing, too, is often the case about watch people's actions rather than what they say. I don't care who the person is on Fox News or CNN or what political spectrum they claim to represent, who's losing their mind over whatever. Show me the data. Show me the hidden aspects. This is one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from a friend of mine's dad, because I went to a small university that had a lot of kids who grew up in farm towns. And his dad looked at me one night over a couple of beers and he said, "Always live like a farmer." And I said, go with that. Walk me through that. And he goes, "A farmer never says, 'Oh, this year I made X. I'm going to raise my lifestyle up to that level.'" He said, because maybe you had 1 or 2 good harvests. Heck, maybe you had 3. There's a bad one coming. So you always live below your means. And I'm like, ooh, that's good. Because I came and grew up in an area where there were a whole bunch of people that were like, live below your means. What the hell's wrong with you? And so, his other advice was, you always monitor what the animals are doing. You always monitor, like, are the squirrels' tails bigger this fall than they were last year? Well, maybe you got a bad winter coming. Do you see animals that are storing food more than they might normally do? Are there animals that aren't there anymore that used to be? And then what do other farmers tell you? What do farmers across the state lines tell you? You are your own little country. Or as we used to say in one of the industries I worked in, you are your own business. So it's like you have to be your own bank. You have to be your own lawyer. You have to be your own intelligence agency. This is what we've often told people at Rogue. I know this is painful. I know no one in the right mind. It's like, oh my God, Veles, please, you've got to be kidding me. I've got enough crap I'm trying to deal with right now, and my kids are sick. I understand. But the old saying of trust no one is more vital in your life right now than it's ever been. Don't even trust me. I always tell my audience has corrected me more times than I want to admit on the, "Hey, Veles, you were a little off on that one thing." And I've often started shows and said, "All right, here's this week's corrections of the things I said last week." But that's good. I even told my audience, "Hey, maybe I'm doing that on purpose just to see if you're paying attention." I had professors that would do that to me. But yeah, I mean, and the $64,000 question to acknowledge my age and an old TV show. Where's it all heading, and what should people be looking for? For me personally, and not dispensing investment advice, that's a hard one, because I know folks who both ethnically and because of the cities in which they live are very tight communities, and they're very, very wealthy, and they have their own private consultants. There's no other way to say that. They have their own intelligence. You don't get that kind of money without basically having your own CIA on speed dial. And when I visited a number of them last year in 2024 in the spring and again in 2023, they were asking me, "What's your intel on? What data do you have on?" And it's like, look, back in 2006 and 2007, you all knew 2008 was coming. You guys bought up properties and other things for a song and made millions of dollars. And the one consistent thing they all told me, Ben, was none of the people we pay to tell us what to do know what to do. And I'm like, oh, baby, I know it's only 2:00, but we should probably have a drink at this point. And I said, okay, let me ask the other question. Well, what are the people that you normally hire to do and get you this data? What are they doing? And they're like, they're asking us what we think they should do. And I'm like, okay, then in political science terms and international affairs terms, we have a complete vacuum of information. And I said, now this goes to the old joke about when you hear political leaders talking about we may do the following, they already have. they wouldn't be talking to the media saying what they think they might do if they hadn't already decided somewhere in a closed room how exactly that's going to happen. Because they're certainly not going to put their political capital at risk by pulling a Zelensky. So when everything goes quiet, something's going on.
Yeah.
And you have to read the signs. You have to read the tea leaves. And this is why one of my colleagues at Rogue is very good at monitoring vaulting activity. And for those of you who may be a little unfamiliar, private vaults where you can put everything from antiquities to metals to whatever in other countries. Even Robert Kiyosaki of Rich Dad Poor Dad fame, just about 2 years or so ago, he started going off the handle about, he's got vaults all around the world because he didn't trust the U.S. government not to seize his stuff. And kind of coming full circle, that goes to what I said about these shipwrecks, because there are some high net worth managing people I know that every time they re-enter the United States, they got to factor in some more time in their day. One of our colleagues, Gus Demos, had this happen so many times, he moved his businesses to Argentina and El Salvador because he just got tired of it. Because what was happening was his Treasury officials rolled in and they weren't accusing him or his clients of fraud or anything. They just wanted to know, who are your clients? Where are they moving their assets? And, Gus is I wouldn't use the word bitter, but Gus is very blunt about his views that these powerful interests view us all as wage slaves. And they don't want you moving money without them being aware of it. There was you may be familiar with this, Ben, about 2-3 years ago, there was kind of a practice in Europe among high net worth people that what they would do is they would go buy a really expensive Rolex or similar watch. And this is one of the reasons why there was some strange inflation when it came to jewelry and things. And then they would book a flight to Europe. They would sell it. They would put the money in a European bank and then fly back. So now they don't need to declare anything, either at the departing airport or the arriving airport, and they don't have to admit anything to their own government. But that's a very circuitous way to move wealth. But when really, really wealthy people are buying a $50,000 watch just to do what I just described, you got to know something weird's going on. And this is where now, to be candid, has the United States threatened some countries about moving their bullion into the United States? Oh, I wouldn't doubt it. I don't know that it's everybody, but I'm sure a couple of countries were told, that's a really nice farm crop you got there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it.
Yeah. Yeah. So definitely lots of stuff to think about. As far as the way you kind of see the next handful of years playing out, as far as financial markets, geopolitics, kind of big picture stuff. Like, we talked a lot about gold. I think the people that think Fort Knox is empty, I think they're fooling themselves. But as far as the way you see kind of big picture topics playing out, where do you think we go from here? Like, people talk about World War III or gold being remonetized and all these different topics. And I'm sure we could maybe do a second episode at some point in the future on them. But
sure.
Where do you think we go from here? I guess is the big picture question. I'll let you take it from there.
Sure. And that's always a hard one because especially I've always been amused that when it comes to money, audience members tend to get a lot more agitated than if you say something about archaeology, as we do sometimes on our shows, and then it turns out, oh wait, no, there's been further work at that ancient site, and we've discovered actually the prior theory was incorrect. Nobody gets worked up over that, but I've known people who provide this type of information, and if they're slightly off, somebody's like, I'm never listening to you again. That stock didn't go up the way I thought it would. I think big picture right now, 6 of one thing, half a dozen of another. The U.S. power grid, number one, being as non-centralized as it is, it's basically a series of pockets around the United States, and it was built that way because of how electric power grew across the United States. And in that decentralized model, I know there's a lot of people, especially in government think tanks, that they want one big smart grid. And I'm telling anyone within the sound of my voice, you do not want that. You do not want that any more than the fools that are like, I want to have all of our nuclear missiles operating on Microsoft Windows. No, you don't. You want a big fat lever with a chain on it to launch one of those missiles. You want no form of technology that it can even remotely get close to something that dangerous. So it's the same thing with our power grid. Having a decentralized and balkanized power grid is actually to our advantage. If you don't believe that, then go back to 2003 when we had that surge out of Cleveland that hit the East Coast and then back again, that very nearly took out the entire U.S. power grid all the way to Chicago. That didn't happen for two reasons. One, the grid is balkanized, and two, and this is true, there was literally a guy a few years away from retirement who saw the needles acting crazy at a substation and realized, hey, we've got a power surge. And all the young kids in the building were like, well, I don't want to make that decision, and I don't remember that from the manual, and this, that, and the other. And he's like, and I've been working this job for 40 years, and I'm telling you, if we don't stop this, Chicago goes dark. And he pulled the switch. And you got to deal with some think tanks to even know what I just said. But this, our bacon got saved because an old guy with a cigarette said, oh, the hell with it, and just pulled the lever. So where I'm going with this is, much like America's infrastructure across the board, there is, because I do a lot of driving across the United States, there are whole swaths of this country we got to fix.
Yeah.
And so one of the ways in which you can solve two problems at once is you build out the power grid or improve the power grid because, hey, we have all this artificial intelligence in these data centers that we got to build because AI is the next best thing to sliced bread. I've worked in technology along with a number of other areas professionally. Is AI overhyped? Well, of course it's overhyped because everything in technology is overhyped. It has to be because the amounts of money required to develop it are huge. I worked in telecommunications in the 90s. I worked in software in the 2000s. High-end consulting to integrate systems that don't talk to each other and figure out how to make them to talk to each other. The list goes on. One of the things about the artificial intelligence topic that has to be kept in mind is most of the power required, especially at the chip level, could be reduced by 90% by tomorrow. This has been proven. There is an integer calculation that if the chips used that for this high-end processing for artificial intelligence, you could cut the power consumption by 90%. Some people believe it's 95%. It's been tested out across the board by a number of different organizations, and it's been proven. So what's the problem? Well, there's several. One, no one makes those chips. Now, is it a highly complex chip that we've got to design? Not at all. We know what we would have to do. We have to redesign the chips in order to enable them to use this type of calculation. Now, for those of you who understand what artificial intelligence terminology, the term known as hallucination, where and I'm speaking a little out of school here, but when the software starts to make mistakes, and it's, for lack of a better way of saying this, because it's not a living, breathing thing, but it starts to believe its own math, and you start getting errors, and the errors start compounding. So one of the problems AI people are always worried about is, oh my God, X, Y, and Z may be faster or better, but does it cause hallucination? This does not cause hallucination. So what's the problem? Well, you'd have to get on the horn with NVIDIA and Intel and AMD and everybody else and say, hey, yeah, we got to redesign this chips. It's not bad. It's actually just kind of a small tweak to how the chip is designed. But we have to allow for this integer calculation. Yeah, but we just made all these chips. I know. Are you saying they're useless? Not exactly. You might be able to find them a use for them, maybe in video games or something, but we've got to rebuild all the chips. So that's expensive, and that's a problem. And the last thing private equity wants to hear is that. Then the other thing is everybody's all committed to this idea of we got to keep building out the power grid because these data centers need all this power. Well, if the data centers don't need as much power, and if the data centers can calculate way more data than we thought they could for the same amount of power they're using today, well, that kind of solves the problem. And that's the last thing anybody wants to hear because everybody has committed themselves to, we've got to build out the power grid and we got to do this. Now, what's the corollary with the power grid? Well, we've been digging into this one on Rogue for about a year now, and at times in a fair degree of depth, which is what's known as micro-nuclear reactors. Basically, the types of nuclear reactors that the United States and the Russians used on satellites and things, or on even the landers we've got roaming around Mars. And the Navy, by the way, has had this technology for years, but it's expensive and it's proprietary and this, that, and the other. Suddenly, about 2 or 3 years ago, Bill Gates parked a small research lab in Kemmerer, Wyoming, and started working on a proprietary micronuclear reactor technology, for which I'm sure he'll bankrupt the United States by making us pay for it. Oh, and by the way, U.S. tax money is helping subsidize that research. But this micronuclear research is going on all across America right now. And very shortly, folks are going to start using these micronuclear reactors. The belief is that these reactors will be used to supplant the power production. So instead of large power plant, large power plant, large power plant, and then you're trying to run all that electricity out to more remote areas, because this is why Gates did it out in that section of Wyoming. Now instead you can set up small power production sites who can extend the range and the power production of the bigger plants. And that enables a lot of things. That allows you to set up data centers as well as people living in places in the United States that might have been a bit impractical before. And it also allows you to take the load off the power grid. So my takeaway is, at a large level, does all of that take place? Because if it does, then that's going to be a massive shift in how we run this country. And this is why there's a lot of people, in fact, I know a couple private equity people out in my part of the world who periodically check in with me on the micronuclear reactor topic, because they're investing in everything from the firms themselves to the companies that make them, the exotic metals and other things that they need for the equipment they use in these systems. The other factor is money. What happens with money? Do we still have a physical currency, or do we go all digital? Even those that want us to, and I'm certainly one of them, to maintain a physical form of currency, even we have to admit, over a slow progression of time, they'll probably pull off a digital model, which concerns me for more reasons than we'd have time to get into. But there's, beyond just, your own individual liberty as a person, rather than knowing that the government is keeping your money safe for you, you've suddenly become.
Sorry if I could interrupt for one sec. The 10-second question on that is: would it be programmable, or do you think that the people in power would most dollars today are digital anyway?
Right.
Would your version be programmable, where you can't buy steak or eggs or whatever it is, right?
I'm going to give you a strange answer. It wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter, because the ability to flip that switch is already inherent to the technology. It's the same way with and again, this is a whole show in its own right. For anybody who knows anything about Danny Casolaro and others that were digging into what was known as the Promise software, or the topic that's known as, quote unquote, the Hydra. There were all these intelligence tools that were created in the late 70s, early 80s into the 90s that U.S. and there's a whole backstory on it, that U.S. intelligence was deploying it, then it looked like the Israelis stole it. It's a mess. And a whole bunch of reporters and others and investigators that were trying to dig into it, a number of them all got killed under mysterious circumstances. But that's at the heart of what we're talking about, Ben, is it goes to what I said about Patrick Ryan. If your brain works at a different level, you can just look at these systems and go, oh, I'll just change the integer calculation to 4. And then suddenly you've got access to, and so we certainly saw this in Canada. Oh, do you have anything to do with the trucking industry? We just froze your bank account. Yeah. And then there's a alternative commentator out of Canada who's amazing, an absolutely amazing person. She uses the moniker Amazing Polly, aka Polly St. George. Polly is just a really good researcher and is fantastic because she's a graphic designer by nature. She does these amazing PowerPoints where she shows these very logical integrations of who's in bed with who and what are they trying to roll out. When the boom came down in 2020, or no, I'm terribly sorry. Yeah, about 2018, 2019, Polly was one of the people that got ripped off YouTube. And I reached out to her, and she told me that all of her bank accounts had been frozen. And so she had fans setting up accounts for her in the United States because she had family members, including some who were in college, that couldn't pay for anything because all their accounts were frozen. So, if you want to go full East German psycho state, it's inherent to the technology. It's just as somebody crazy enough to do that. And then, for the wackier people I know that are out there that think in these terms, do you equally have a group of people as smart as the people who instituted such a system who know how to electronically take it down? And that, quite frankly, I got to tell you, I've been in some think tank meetings where that topic's been discussed, where bad people show restraint because they know there are folks out there that are like, I'm a highly committed hacker who just lost everything. You know what? I'm taking your whole system down with the press of a key. Have a nice day. Hope you know how to farm. So yeah, I mean, the long term is often the case, is tea leaves and hard to say, but some of these larger projects that are out there, like the AI data center and power grid thing, those will be very telling. Notwithstanding the fact that Intel just announced last Friday that their manufacturing of the chip plant in Columbus, Ohio is going to be delayed 3 years. Because when I saw that, I thought, well, my God, in technology, 6 months is a year. So if you're telling me you're delaying it by 3 years, as an IT professional among others, then that means you're just not building it.
Yeah.
And that means the state of Ohio's at $20 billion. And I'm pretty sure they're going to notice that money is missing. I'm just thinking out of the box here, but I'm pretty sure they're going to notice that money's missing. So yeah, these are a lot of, it's just a big swirl out there of things. Now, does the United States start reinvesting in our infrastructure? Because if that happens, from an investing standpoint, things get, of a fashion, in my opinion, easier. Because now you're looking at trucking companies. Now you're looking at steel makers for rebar and other things to build roads. That is a little more straightforward form of investing than the subtlety and the elegance of which way is the wind blowing in Silicon Valley today. But yeah, it's, what are we going to do with money? What does money look like at a intrinsic level? And then some of these large scale projects, because right now, of everything that's out there, somebody once said, my God, what would the world be like if we didn't have the personal computer start taking off in the early 1980s? And I lived through those years, and I get it. That's very true, because that led to software, that led to data centers, that led to, on and on and on. We don't have something like that we can all get behind and build an economy on, other than perhaps space exploration, but that's a whole other topic. The other thing too is, not just in the case of the U.S. economy, but back to our friend Europe. Europe's a mess, and it's a self-inflicted mess, which I think was by design. But in the final analysis, everyone in Europe needs power, because they're not getting it from the Russians. And even if they could, I think at this point, Europe's finally learned, stop relying on people who can hold you accountable for your natural gas and your oil. I'm just saying. And that goes for Saudi Arabia too. So Europe is back on the, maybe we shouldn't have gotten rid of all those nuclear power plants kick. But not to be indelicate, who has the technology? The United States does. And what would be a perfect solution for Europe? They don't need, I mean, they would, but they don't need large-scale nuclear power plants. They need micro nuclear power plants. That would be a much better solution for Europe. And it would be a much better solution for Europe across the board. And you could ride that one out financially for, God, 20 years or more, because then you got to sustain all of it once it's built.
Yeah. Interesting. You've definitely given me a lot to think about. I'm sure my viewers will be thinking the same thing. Lots of questions, so I'm sure we'll have to have you back on for round 2 at some point. If my listeners want to find your work or some of your other podcast appearances, where can they find you?
They can find us in a couple of places. They can find us on, we do have a page on YouTube, and it is ESW, Echo Sierra Whiskey, Rogue News, ROGUE News, all one word. The safer place to find us, because sometimes the folks on that channel get a little unhappy with us, is Rumble. What do you call it? The platform Rumble. And you can find us there as Rogue News ESW. And if you're looking for us on Rumble, we have a pillar with our name underneath it and 3 stars. If you see that, you found us. If you're looking for us on YouTube, we've got what looks like 2 letter E's facing each other. And then we're also on Twitch as well, as kind of a backup. We have a website. We're still trying to get that straightened out. Part of the challenge for us at Rogue is, just simply put, we all work full time on. I mean, it's one of the ways in which we acquire the data we have. We all work full time at full-time jobs that take up huge amounts of time. So until we reach the point that we're committed, and I've raised it a couple of times to V, my colleague, hey, maybe we could just get some cousins or something, or some young college students to just help us maintain the web front end. We've got very smart people who have set up that stuff for us, but like anything, it needs care and feeding, and we've struggled with it. So we right now are just mainly content via YouTube or Rumble is best to find us.
Yeah, I'll make sure to drop links in the description. But I guess if there's any web developers listening, you might have an opportunity there. So as far as my traditional closing question, I do have to ask, what is one book I should add to my reading list? Can be finance, history, anything you think would be interesting.
That's a great question. That's an absolutely great question. And I often, what do you call it? I often share with my audience, half of my content is from the books I read. I've got bookcases filled to the eyeballs. I'll give you two because they're both sitting right here. One is a fairly recent book called The Most Dangerous Book in the World, 9/11 as Mass Ritual by S.K. Bain. And for anybody who wants to read that or has interest in that, that deals with a lot of the numerology and ancient belief systems and stuff that may or may not have been blended into what occurred on 9/11. The other is, let me see here. Thinking from a financial perspective. Well, I have no doubt others have recommended this one, Lucifer's Banker.
That one's new to me, actually. So.
Oh, you're kidding? By Birkenfeld. This is Brad Birkenfeld was a guy that worked. He was an American, but he was actually a Swiss banking official. And he's a very interesting guy. He saw what was going on when it comes to hiding and laundering of money and how the Swiss were doing it. And he always kind of had a problem because Swiss were like, this guy's an American, I don't trust him. And at some point, I forget what the trigger was, but he went to federal agencies in the U.S. and said, look, you've got billions of dollars that are being laundered and this, that, and the other by high net worth people and criminal organizations. And typical of our government, what happened was it wasn't so much that a crime was being committed that upset them. It was the fact that both of these agencies knew about it. That Treasury knew about it, and I forget who the other one was. And so what happened was, just because of spite, the U.S. government prosecuted him and put him into prison. And then, because God has a sense of humor, a group of people that are the sorts of people that keep this country running came to Birkenfeld and said, hey, by the way, you do know that if the U.S. government reclaims money that it's owed, that you can fill out this form with the Treasury Department and you get 30% back. And so he did that. And then when they let him out of prison, I think 18 months later, the Treasury Department, while gritting their teeth, handed him a check for $125 million.
Wow.
And he was interviewed on 60 Minutes and similar, and then he used that money to develop programs and things to train accountants and others how to keep an eye out for this, and also to help people who have been, because this happens a lot, people who got dragged into federal investigations as a witness and didn't understand that, I hate to say this, but the government wasn't trying to do the right thing. The government was arguing with itself over which one of them gets credit for it, and they're going to burn you in the process. And so Birkenfeld has been helping people to not get burned the way he did. And final comment on that topic, this is no joke. The Swiss government has an arrest warrant out for him.
Really?
For life. Because he violated their banking rules, and he cost them huge amounts of money. And so he has to be very careful when he travels. Not because, Swiss intelligence is out looking for him, but because, private contractors and stuff could grab him.
Sounds like a fascinating story. I'll definitely have to check both those books out, but I really appreciate taking the time. So I think with that, we'll be wrapping up. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.